Welcome to another episode of the Group Dynamic Podcast. In the Group Dynamic Podcast, we are discussing various topics around group dynamics or interpersonal dynamics. And in this episode, which is part of a series, we are talking about the OLAB, the Organizational Laboratory or Organization Training, as it is called. And if you're interested in an in-depth discussion about what the OLAB is, I suggest to listen to the first episode where we are talking about what it is and how it all starts, because you're spending roughly 1 week with about 100 people in a hotel, and the only task is create an organization that is capable to take a decision. And this is Roland, based in Vienna, and me, Jürgen, based in Berlin, are looking back onto 3 different OLABs that we have attended, and we're trying to share our experience of different things that are happening in this organizational laboratory. And in the last episode, we talked about one approach to break down the larger group of 100 people into smaller subgroups of 25 people, which still doesn't work very well, and then break it down into even smaller groups of 9, 10, 11, 12 people, and how the decision process was made in the small group. And at a certain point, Roland mentioned that working in the small group doesn't solve the larger problem, negotiating and working in the larger system with the 100 people. So at a certain point, you might have the idea to select a representative or a delegate from the small group who is meeting with other delegates of other small groups in a group of delegates. And you realize that we are using that I have used 2 different words, representative and delegate. And this is something that we would like to talk about this time in this episode of the Group Dynamic Podcast. So Roland, I'm happy to have you back again and very excited to hear about your experience with the representative or delegate.
Hello, Jürgen. It's good to talk to you again, also for me. And yeah, let's see how we find a mutual picture if we share our pictures here.
And I think the first distinction that the 2 of us made and trying to create a mutual picture of that is the word delegate or representative. And that was a heated discussion in some groups, as I remember, because if you send someone, the first question obviously is, who should it be? Because this is kind of an authority figure. And there is the need as the small group to entitle someone to represent you in the group of delegates. And that was the tricky thing as far as I remember. Do I trust the person that I sent into the group of representatives, into the group of delegates, to represent me in a way that I would like this person to represent me? And that is the difference in the words. When you said delegates, I realized that we had a representative. And representative for me is someone, in my fantasy organization in mind, is someone who has more decision-making authority than just a delegate. And decision-making authority was one thing that we specifically discussed. So what can this person decide? And I said, I don't care. This person can decide anything they need to decide, and I'm okay with it. So they have full authority. I authorized the representative fully. And we said as a group, we trust that this person will come back. If the person says, I cannot decide it on my own, I have to double check with my group. In other groups, it was totally different. In other groups, the representative had to double check everything with the group, which was tremendously annoying for the groups of representatives if you have these different power imbalances in the group. So I would say it went quite smoothly, because from my point of view, we authorized the representative fully, but I have to admit, I have to confess, that it was very easy for me to give full authority to the representative, because I was wondering, what could happen during the OLAB? They cannot decide anything that has a real impact on me. Honestly, I don't know if I would have been so relaxed if it would be a real case scenario. But I remember from previous discussions that this was a bit more heated in your group, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And you give a perfect example for that.
Yeah.
It's a flight. If you tell your, as you called the person representative, that anything goes, there is nothing there. So you declare by yourself that you don't care.
Well, I make my life easier, way easier.
Yeah, totally. But this is, and in the same moment you said you're not quite sure if you would have done that if there would have been something at stake for you,
absolutely.
like in the outside. Yeah, but that's, you see, that's like a hole where you are fleeing, because in saying, in defining, there is nothing at stake for you. You give a freedom to the so-called representative that is not a real freedom, but it's just a wild card. Do whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah.
And well, this still might not be the point of view of the representative, because maybe the representative still had some ideas of what the people in the group are interested in or not, or how large his free space is. But there is another interesting thing for me that you were talking about, is that you told the representative that from your point of view, he can do whatever he wants. And this gives me the impression there is no group decision.
Well, because obviously the others in the group can't say it, but they basically said the same. So they can't say it.
You mean like they can say it today in our podcast?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's important to give our listeners the image that there was a group discussion, and the group as a whole decided that the representative can do whatever he or she wants.
Yeah.
But now that's exactly coming back to the group, like you said, where you feel it's empty, where you feel you are actually fleeing from a responsibility because you are defining the system as not valid enough to put in some, let's say, some boundaries. You say do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And with a certain tactic on that,
yeah.
Because you know if the representative has that wild card, it will give a lot more room for discussion in the plenary.
Yep.
And it's all about trust, you know. But that's an interesting thing also I learned, because you asked me about what happened in my experience in the situation where I was. The situation where I was a little bit the same, but I figured out, and this was one of my learning out of the organizational training, I trusted everybody. And if you trust everybody, it's no trust anymore. It's just dangerous not being in contact with reality. So what I figured was that it's important, either way, if you define the organizational training as relevant, then it's important to take care of one's boundaries. So for me, it was very relevant, because I said I'm very interested and I wanna make that happen. I want to be part of it, and I want to really work on that. So I put a lot of motivation and a lot of emotion in it. And on the other hand, I gave my trust to everybody. So I did not really keep my boundaries. And if I listened to you, you found another loophole, or your group found another loophole. And this loophole would be, well, you say do whatever you want, but you define the context of not valid and not dangerous or not relevant. So now you have not the strong emotional part with it, maybe, or you don't invest a lot of emotions or thoughts or whatever in it, but you also lose. It's like it's a soup without any taste. You lose everything. And so interestingly, for us, it was an issue of trust. So in my organizational laboratory, in the first one, and in the second one, I already had the learning out of that. But in the first one, I figured that my trust in everybody in the laboratory did really have a backlash on myself, because I realized that people did what they want, but that a lot of that what people did was not in my interest. And the only one to blame for that was I myself, because I did not define my interest. Okay? And I was invested deeply emotionally. So this is my differentiation. In my fantasy, it's about your case. I was invested deeply emotionally, and I had the impression that it would be in my interest to trust the representative or delegate, that in our case it was a man, that he would do the representation or delegation in the best interest, in this case for me as an individual, which was a totally wrong conclusion. And for me, the learning from my first organizational laboratory was there is a need for negotiation as an individual about my boundaries, about my interests, and about goes, no goes, or points of negotiation. And for me, it's very important, and this was the learning out of the first organizational laboratory, to really take care of that, even if it means that you have to go through a conflict. And my mistake was that I trusted too much, because I was not really aware of this, what trust means. And regarding the differentiation between the word delegate and the word representative, I myself, for me, it's rather the same, but I don't know exactly, if I think about right now, I don't know the meaning, the etymology of the word delegate, but I know that representative means that a person represents. So in another situation, this person represents the opinion of the group he or she is representative of. So it's a task where this person should not be in his individual mind. He should not think about his or her individual concerns, but he or she should represent the concerns of the group that sent him to the plenary. I don't know about the meaning of the word delegate, but I use both words synonymous. So for me, it's the same. It's a very important task, because it's difficult, because there is always the chance that the representative does not represent the opinion of the group, but he or she represents his or her own opinion. So this would be, if you will, something that betrays the group.
It is interesting. I'm still sitting with the totally different experiences that the two of us had. So being fully invested and being retreated in a way. And for me, when you said you're losing something, I would say it was very energy efficient to behave that way. And I'm wondering, in organizations, probably the two of us are representations of how people act, or some people act in real life organizations. So some are really invested in it. They really are committed to these things and push things with positive and negative effects that come with that. And other people are more like me and the group, saying, okay, now we're pushing the responsibility to the representative and let them do it. And I remember there was one situation where I was totally confused. I simply lost track of what was going on. And usually I would be very stressed out. But at that point, I looked at our representative and said, look, you are the boss and I'm just a stupid employee. I don't care. Just get me on board. It is your job. And she said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And that felt very convenient for me. And I'm wondering how many people are doing that in organizations. And it's quite interesting for me to see, and there are probably many more, two very drastic examples of your experience and my experience in this organization. Just reflecting it now. So maybe everything that is very smooth is creating avoidance. Everything that is very much invested is probably creating conflicts. But what is better? I wouldn't say there is a better approach or worse approach. There are just different approaches to that. And I'm quite like it that we are able to bring them together here. Let's talk about the groups of delegates, because I have never been there. But I remember that you have had the chance to attend that. And by the way, I have never been there because I have chosen never to be there, because I think it would have been possible to sit there and just observe them. And by the way, we haven't talked about that. That's also maybe an interesting side remark, sending one person or the other person, or a second person before we come to the group of delegates. I'm just remembering that, because there was a heated discussion because some groups send one representative or delegate and others send two. And I always said, if I have to send two, I'm either sending the signal that I don't trust the first one, so there has to be an observer of the representative, or I think that the first representative is weak, so I have to send a second one for backup. Plus, I had the impression that it would be unfair if we send one representative and you would send two representatives, that you have twice the brain power in the room, which I would also would find unfair. So my take would have been send one person per group only. I don't know if that was the same in your group, the same discussion.
Well, there were several discussions, including that what you described right now, and there you can see what it means if you have open ground. You need to decide on everything, and not only you within your group, but also when the groups in the plenary are confronted with the different decisions, like a group sending two representatives, a group sending only one representative, and so forth. Then you again have to discuss that and somehow find a decision. Yeah. So now you see how many decisions are already pre-decided to make our society able to function. Yeah. And the moment you take that all away, you see that you need to negotiate on a lot of things. And the point was that all those things happened also in in the organizational training I was in. So it happened that group sent two representatives. It happened that group sent one representative. It happened that group said we are exchanging representatives, and so forth. Mm-hmm. This was the one side, and which is possible because everything was open. So everything has to be, every idea that was brought up, every action that was done by the several groups had to be discussed. And I just want to go into the situation as a representative. So I was several times in the 2 organizational trainings I participated, a representative. And I can truly tell for myself, in my experience, I was already invested within the group, and there were several emotions floating. But the moment I went into the role of a representative or delegate, and I stepped in the group of representatives, you can think about it as Bernhard Pesendorfer called it. If you think there is the usual current in groups, so the current you have all the electrical machines you have in the household, then you can think as a metaphor as the strong current in the plenary. So all the emotions you have are sort of boosted.
You mean,
at least in my case.
If you say plenary, you mean the plenary of the delegates?
Sorry, I got it wrong. I meant the group of representatives.
Yeah, because we have the large plenary, the 100, then we have the small
100
group.
And now I mixed it up. Yeah, I mixed it up. Sorry for that. So what I meant was the difference between the group, because both are groups. Okay, so you have a group. We discussed it already, because there is direct communication is only possible if you have roughly about 12 people. Now we have in total roughly about 100 people, so you need to divide the 100 people into small groups. There you can have the direct communication, and then you need to establish another group which is called the group of representatives. And there you again have a small group, and you again have discussions. But the interesting thing, and this is what I experienced for myself, is that all the emotions, everything that's showing up is like boosted. Because what happened to me was I was not only sitting there as individual and thinking about my opinion. I was there because 10 people out of my group trusted in me and said, you go and we trust in you, just negotiate in our interest. So I had a certain burden on myself, and this burden boosted my emotions. So I was very fast in very strong emotional states, especially in the group of the delegates. And this also led to my decision that in the second organizational training I was participating, I really kept it a notch down. So I really was very, very, very attentive. When I decided to be the delegate, I was very, very aware of these strong emotions that are floating in a group of delegates. And in the second organizational training, I also decided, in our group decided to make, to change the delegates. So to put a little bit of this weight from the shoulders of one person. And also it was a very, very good training in get an experience. What does it mean if I am sent by people who trust in me and I am sent to a negotiation where I have to stand in for the interests of the group that is sending me? And so my experience is there that you really, really, really have a boost in the emotions. You really have a boost in the significance, in the pressure. And this is what I realized when I was stepping in the role of a representative. And it gave me a great deal of learning, but it was also very overwhelming, especially in the first steps when I tried it out to be a representative.
So the burden of leadership that you're really experiencing in the situation. And I'm curious, you mentioned that you change representatives. We didn't do that in the beginning. And at a later point in time, someone came up with the idea to establish shared leadership, which means basically changing the representatives. And I wasn't sure about how that would work in the plenary, because for me, and in another episode, we talked a lot about anxiety that is in the system, that is in the organization. Every time you change something, you change a representative, for me, there would be a risk of creating anxiety again, creating issues of information flows and all these things. It seemed to have worked for you to change the representatives. Did it?
Totally. But now I have the question, because you say for us or we. So because the question would be, did the plenary did the group of representatives decide
No, the small
that
group.
there is a switch? Okay, the small
Yeah.
group decided they want to switch representatives.
Oh, for you,
Okay.
it was the group of delegates who decided that?
No. It was also in the small
Yeah.
group, but I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that I know it from your side also. So from my side was that I already had the experience of my first organizational training. So I knew it was very hard to cope. And so there was a big learning. First of all, I did the second organizational training. I said the group has to be, the smaller the group, the easier to move. So in the second organizational training, I really tried to have a very small group where we discussed the details within the group. So now you have the advantage against all the others that you have a very small group. You have a lot of talking time. So every person in the group has a lot of time of talking, and you can really come very close together.
So how small was this group?
Well, we
compared to-
were only 4 people.
Okay.
So we were very fast because we had all the time. If you compare it with a group of 12 people,
Sure.
we have 3 times of speaking time per individual. So you have a lot more time to really talk to each other, to get close to each other, to decide on things, to view on things from different point of views. So this was my learning from the first organizational training. So we were faster in our small group than all the bigger groups, which is a physical factor. It's no magic, it's just plain physics, If you have 12 people and a certain amount of time for talking together, then 12 people individually have less time to talk than 4 people have. And the next thing was that I knew that the plenary was a very, very hard to cope, and that I knew that there were different situations and different characters. So it's good if you, from the point of view of the small group, it's good that you send the right delegate with the right mindset at the right time. So maybe you have a very pushy delegate, and the pushy delegate would be best in a situation where you need this sort of this type of delegate. But on the other hand, there are moments when it's better you have a delegate that is more diplomatic. And so you can sort of play a little bit about that. So one of the learnings I had in the organizational training, and this is the big learning there you can take home for you. You can really play with that. You can play how you yourself are reacting, how the emotions are somehow emerging within your body, how you are coping with situations. You can observe others. You can observe the group of representatives, how they do, how people react, how strongly they are in an emotional sort of expression, how strongly they are calm, and so forth. You can see what happens in the plenary. You can have a look at all the impact the plenary has. You can have a look at all the impact the small group has, and so forth. So one of the most important things for me in this learning is it's never about whether this is the right thing to do or this is the wrong thing to do. It's rather do whatever you want, but try to observe it and try to become conscious of it. And that's the big learning then.
When you said 4 groups, you increase speed. I would agree. But at the same time, 12 people, you have more different perspectives. So, I mean, 4 people, if you have someone talking more, you better hope that this person has brilliant ideas. But the trade-off would be that you have simply less ideas if you just have 4 people.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
So I'm just tempted to do another OLAB and test drive that. Well, it's interesting. The representative thing, the delegate thing, the circle of delegates, for me, that is quite interesting. And still, it's kind of a mysterium for me because, like I said, I never have attended, which is another good example for me about leadership circles in organizations. A lot of the employees inside the organization, and I would consider myself as having been an employee in this OLAB, they sometimes don't see what the leaders are doing. So feeding information from the small group into the circle of delegates and feeding information back. That's a crucial thing. And then it was very easy for me to retreat back into my small group and not to see the big picture. Sometimes my emotional state was, I don't care that much about the big picture because I like my department. We had a nice office, we had a good working atmosphere and all of these things. And I simply didn't need to be too much invested in the larger organization. And then if we think that a lot of companies are talking about purpose and reaching each and every employee to follow this purpose and to buy in, I'm wondering how difficult this is going to be to really achieve that.
Yeah, and also maybe why is that what you have done? Maybe you just needed a little bit of rest. Yeah. Maybe you just needed a little bit of a pause, and so you did the right thing in the moment. Yeah. And just one question, because I'm very curious about that. I can't remember whether you already said it. How big was your small group?
9 people.
Nine people.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Interesting. And I mean, how important is it to pull yourself back in an organization? How important is it to be very invested in an organization at a certain point in time? And that's also, let's say, the real life. Sometimes individuals have the capacity to bring themselves more fully into an organization, whether this is good or bad. Or there are times when they have to retreat. So you can never expect an organization to run at full speed at any time. And maybe one thing to discuss in the next episode and to wrap this series of discussions about OLAB up would be, was it successful in the end? So how did it end? How did the week end? Because we heard a lot about conflicts. We had a lot about things that have to be negotiated, renegotiated. So Roland, I would suggest in the next episode, we're talking a little bit about how it all ended and maybe briefly touch upon the staff, how at least they helped us in a certain situation to get out of a very messy situation. So thank you very much for listening. Roland, thank you very much for being here again for this 3rd episode on the OLAB, the Organizational Laboratory. And I'm looking forward to see and hear you next time.
Thank you for having me.